Yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 8 of the Kick and Bass podcast. This is the first one for 2023, and we have a lot of special things planned this year, so I'm super excited for that. Today, we have Kai William. He's a super sick house producer from Brooklyn, New York. We've been buddies for a few years, and we just hired him to run the minimal house genre at Kick and Bass, which we're super excited about. So yeah, welcome, Kai.
What's going on, dude? Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here. I've always had like a passion for helping teach and educate on music production, so I'm super excited about all this.
Yeah, man, we were super stoked to have you, especially to kind of spearhead this genre, because it was something that me and Freddie have been talking about for a bit. Is like, you know, we've been very like tech house focused with this kind of like American tech house sound, and I think a lot of our members, they're not just focused on one genre. They have multiple interests. They like to learn techniques from other stuff. So yeah, to kind of have you spearhead this is super awesome. We're really excited. But yeah, man, I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your journey as a music producer and kind of how you got into it. I think it's always interesting to hear, you know, what people were listening to when they first got into electronic music, and you know, the different kind of steps they took to kind of get where they are now. So yeah, just tell me a little bit about that.
Cool. Yeah. So, like you said, I'm Kai William. I started this project about 3.5 years ago now. I've always been into music, so I played guitar when I was younger. I was in a band. I've been DJing since I was 12. I'm 28 now. I used to do like weddings and bar mitzvahs with my friend's
Oh
father
shit.
growing up. Yeah. So like at 12, 13,
Serato
14.
vinyl.
Yeah. So yeah, that tractor, everything. And then eventually when I got to college, I started DJing like fraternity parties and some of the bars around there. And then eventually got my first club play at Harrah's down in Atlantic City. They gave me a night down there. But I was mostly doing top 40 stuff. It wasn't like house music at all. And I got into house music, I guess like 4 years ago now. I went to Brooklyn Mirage for Anjuna Deep, and that is actually like that style of deep house music is how I got into it. I started off producing that, DJing that. I still like that stuff, but my journey has definitely ended up in a much different place now. Yeah, I've always been interested in music in my whole life. It's always just been something there for me. And then I started producing about 3.5 years ago, and I simultaneously started my label at the same time, which I don't know if that was the best idea because I didn't really know what I was doing. But I guess like anything, if you're passionate enough, you'll figure it out. So yeah, I started off with like the Anjuna Deep, like that sort of style, and then I started to find like Chris Dusty and Toman, like that stuff around like when the pandemic started, and I feel like that was a very easy genre to listen to at home, which is why I think this genre really kind of took off. People didn't really like want to listen to club bangers at home. They wanted something easier on the ears. So I kind of just went and spearheaded that route. And then as things started to open up, I never really had a chance to like explore that side of the more like energetic music that I've been kind of making on this more minimal side. So I would say my sound now is sort of a blend of like minimal and tech house, like this minimal tech fusion where it's not quite like this American tech house sound you're talking about, and it's not quite this European sound. It's sort of like this middle line between the two of them.
Yeah, I think your background is like I hear that a lot with a lot of producers, like Sid. I'm sure you know Carlos Sid.
Mhm. Yep.
I think he started the same way. Like his dad owned a wedding venue or like restaurant in like Long Island, and he would DJ like all the weddings there. And you know, like for me, it was like very similar. It's like kind of started doing like parties in high school and college where it's like you got to be open format, top 40, kind of do whatever. But I feel like that always like leads to um like just better DJing skills down the line, because it's like you really know how to like read a room, deal with like sloppy people around you, deal with requests, like you know, all the like technical stuff of DJing. And especially like your journey to like kind of like the genre that you're at now. I think like a lot of people kind of when they get into producing, like the big question is like, how do I stand out? How do I kind of like make my own sound? For example, we had a whole podcast episode just on
Hmm.
finding your own sound. And I think, you know, one of the big tips that I always give people is like, you know, combine genres that you like and kind of take influence from, you know, if you like this, the way this artist does this thing and the way this artist does that thing. And I think like what you're doing now kind of taking some characteristics from the more like European minimal sound and giving it a little bit more energy and like structure that, you know, the American tech house sounds like. That's all it really needs to kind of have something that's like, all right, that's you, that's his sound. I can recognize that. So
Yeah, I think in the beginning it's a very confusing thing, and I honestly think up until not even 6 months ago, I was still kind of looking for my own personal sound. Yeah, I had my label and I knew what I liked, so I knew what to release, but I didn't really have my own style, and I feel like now I've really found my groove, and it was because I mean, I produce everything, like I produce techno, I produce melodic, I produce organic, everything, and I also like to challenge people to do that for fun sometimes because you never know what you're gonna find out. So I'm always just I think this is important too. When you sit down and produce, it's like you don't always have to be releasing everything. And I think it's in those sessions where you really like kind of find yourself, and then you can go back and fine tune and tailor that's what works for you.
yeah, especially like techniques, like it's so easy if you're kind of, especially with like tech house, because it can be very simplistic music. And oftentimes like the best records are like very simple. So I feel like it's easy to get in like this cycle where you don't either kind of like expand your production techniques, like maybe you're not, for example, like working on chord progressions or melodies that much, you know, because you're just kind of focused on drums and bass line. So it's like
Hmm.
exploring these other genres where it's like you're kind of forced to like learn how to do these things. You know, that gives you a much broader toolbox to kind of go back into your own stuff and be like, oh, even if that track, that organic house track, you know, I'm not going to release it. Like maybe I learned how to make like sick atmospheres and pads that I can now use for this other track or something like that.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that.
Um, cool, man. So yeah, I wanted to focus this episode a little bit on like minimal house because I think it's like an interesting term and it gets thrown around a lot. And it's kind of like now it's becoming, in my opinion, like what tech house now means, I guess, when people hear it, which it
Yeah.
to me it doesn't really mean anything anymore. Like it used to when you like 3 or 4 years ago, if you heard like tech house, like there's a very specific sound that you would kind of think to and like artists and parties and vibes. And now it really just doesn't mean anything. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
house music with like a 909 open hat and a clap, kind of. That's
Yeah.
it. And I think minimal's not there totally, but like it's kind of like gotten like very loose on like what the definition is. So yeah, I just wanted to like pick your brain a bit on like, you know, that kind of
Sure.
definition
Yeah,
debacle.
I actually go back. I have a pretty like a core group of like producer friends that talk to. We talk about this all the time, and it's just like this term is thrown around so loosely. And I've kind of myself broken it down into these three different categories for minimal. So I consider it Romanian minimal, deep minimal, and minimal tech. And I feel like that is the best way you can classify it. And I think beatport comes into play too. And people think about this because it's I don't know, like so as owning a label, you submit your track as a genre, what you think it is, and Beatport will actually take that and they'll say, okay, we don't think this is that. So I've had
But
times where we submit
people
it
don't
as
realize that you don't really
yeah,
choose what the genre is technically on
yeah,
Beatport.
yeah, you can. I mean, there's a couple reasons to do that, but I think one of them is so people don't just put stuff in easier genres to chart in.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, to me, it's like Romanian, deep, and tech are like the three like subgenres of minimal, and like the Romanian stuff's obviously more like the Ricardo Villobos and like the Christy Khans and the Slapbacksies, and then you have the minimal deep, which is like Ruse, Late Replies, people like Ken Kelly or like Anada, and then you have like minimal tech, which is like people consider like Ben Sterling or Bibby or like Pasta and those guys. So that's kind of how I separate it. But like I guess it's anything that's more stripped back, and just like shorter samples, more simple grooves and stuff like that. Like not like crazy tops on it. That's kind of how I would really describe it and separate the genre. But I definitely think there's a lot of things that are incorrectly labeled as minimal right now. It's a very loose term, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to kind of classify it. Like I'm sure, you know, especially it's hard in a podcast like this because it's like we're not like triggering samples of stuff so people can hear it. But like I would
Yeah.
recommend anyone listening to like, you know, Kai just gave some great examples of like artists and kind of like specific genre names to like look into playlists and stuff. But I feel like, yeah, a lot of times now, like the kind of last category you said of like the solid grooves, BB, even someone like Jamie Jones or someone like that
That's
kind
tech
of,
house to me, honestly.
yeah. But I think that kind of gets categorized as like minimal, and I think those guys are probably in America out of those three categories like the most popular, with like Romanian kind of minimal being like the least known. Like even for me, like most of those artists, like I mean I know Ricardo, but like the other ones, like I don't know. Like I just think of like Sun Waves or something like that, and people
Exactly. Yes. Sun waves.
people
Yeah.
partying for like 24 hours until like really long loops, kind of like very stripped back stuff.
Yeah.
um but yeah, and then I think the deep tech stuff definitely had a huge emergence, like you said, over the pandemic. Especially because it's like you're right, like people are working from home, they want like long mixes that they aren't necessarily like thrown all over the place when they
Yeah.
listen to. And I think especially like the on social media, a lot of those guys have gotten like really popular. You have a lot of those like influencer pages, like those kind of tech deep, which is also interesting that that's now an artist.
I saw that the other day. It's
It's
like
weird, right? It's like,
it's like top 10. It's like number 6 right now on the whole site. It's
yeah,
wild.
yeah. Carlos pointed that out to me, or someone did, and I was like, it's
I
kind
used
of
to
like a
follow the
genius move.
page.
Yeah, same. It's like a
Yeah.
genius move because it's like you already have like hundreds of thousands of followers. So for anyone not knowing, this is a like I would call it like an influencer page on Instagram where they would like repost clips of like DJs playing big festivals and like
hmm
kind of just like a content page. But this has been around for a while, like before that kind of got popular. And then now Tech It Deep, which was the name of the page, is like an artist and they have like a song. I think it's called Maria Maria or something.
Yeah, and a label too, it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's get the dollar however you can. So I respect the hustle, but um yeah, I think one of my original point was like the kind of minimal deep tech guys, like the Stussies, the Fuse. Did you say like the label
Yeah,
or?
well, yeah, Fuse, and then like you got like Joko and guys like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sound got really popular. Those guys got, started touring everywhere, playing all around the world, and introducing the sound. Um, but yeah, I think it's funny because like I think the way that minimal is kind of being defined is just anything that's not American tech house almost in like
Yeah.
the tech house world. So someone like for example, when I said like Jamie Jones, who's like historically been like a house artist, like a tech house artist kind of in
hmm
the last like 5 years, even deep house kind of like at certain points, is now considered more like minimal just because it doesn't really go into like the more American tech house sound, which is like Chris Lake, Fisher, John Summit, even me, for example. That would be
hmm
Noizu. That's like kind of like these, even though a lot of those artists aren't really American, it's like the sound that really popped
Yeah.
off in the States in the last 5 years. But yeah, now it's like a lot of people are just like, they want something a little more deep, maybe European sounding. It's minimal, which is just like, to me, it's
Yeah.
funny.
hmm No, yeah, it's very interesting to see, and like I said, I talk to my friends about this all the time, and it's just, yeah, because it is. I don't know. When I think top creations, I just think that kind of is tech house to me anyway. But I guess it is separated, like you said.
Yeah, I think also like a lot of the labels that were more labels and artists that were more traditionally tech house. Um, and we can talk about like why this is, but like let's say like you go back like 4 years and you look at like um even like Repopulate Mars, or you look at like Latman and Detlef and like these kind of like
hmm
hot hitters on like Hot Creations, Relief at the time. What else is big? Tool Room kind of does their own thing, but those
Yeah.
guys now are making what I guess is like it's a much I think it's like a response to like the American tech house sound. So it's like
hmm
their productions have gone even more
They're
deeper, I
like
guess, and more stripped down.
they're kind of like the forward thinkers, I guess, in a way. It's like they're always looking for something new, and they want to innovate the sound, in this own interesting, unique direction. So I think that's kind of my best answer for why they're doing that.
I think it's like a response to, exactly what you said, like trying to innovate, take it to the next, a new sound, a new level. But it's interesting because it's like it's kind of like a lot of those artists, like I don't see them playing as much in America anymore
Mm-mm.
when they used to be touring a lot more. And I think it's because, either the crowds here are more used to the higher energy sounds, and so like their sets just won't make sense here, maybe.
Yeah, it's just more accessible for people to kind of come into that more energetic American style tech house, and I get it. Like I, that's how I came in, and that's how I've gotten to where I'm at. And like it's kind of you take it even further back. It's like people come into like Steve Aoki, Martin Garrix, and Avicii, and then they come down to like the American tech house, and it's just like moving down. Some people go way down, and some people just kind of stay where it's at. But yeah.
Yeah, I do you think? Yeah, so I guess let's talk a little bit about you know, that sound coming to America, because I'm sure you have dealt with this. Like, I know you throw parties in Brooklyn and stuff, and
Hmm.
I've been to about a bunch of parties that kind of are in that like three category minimal
Hmm.
categories. But it's like, yeah, how do you see that genre growing in like the States, and what cities do you see it growing?
Yeah, it's definitely growing because like I didn't think people in like I don't know Tennessee or Arkansas or wherever would be into this music. I have people message me from there. I even have promoters now who are asking people who are trying to throw parties and within this style. And like even so me and his name is Jeff Sorkowitz. I'm sure some people in the chat are familiar with him. But we started throwing parties for this style of like more minimal tech stuff and minimal deep. I guess like 2 years ago now, and it was pretty hard then, even in New York. And like we did a couple in Miami too, and it was really difficult. And I feel like now it's so much easier bringing those acts here, and I it's because it is that sound is specifically growing a lot. And I think because house music is it's pretty much radio music at this point. I mean, you have like it's crazy like losing it Fisher is like it's like a wedding song now. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah, yeah.
it's become very accessible, and I think that means that there's more people exploring into it deeper. So yeah, there is more promoters and people wanting this sound everywhere. So I think it is going to do nothing but grow. I don't know if it will ever get to a point of where like that American Tech House is, just because of the whole accessibility portion of it. But I think it's definitely going to grow much bigger than it is now. And in locations like I mean, Miami's the hot spot for this right now for sure. Um, it's kind of crazy what they do down there. Like I was just at Art Basel, and like Miami Link and Space in Miami is running like 8 events at the same time, and like a majority of those were like these like Bibby minimal tech type parties. So it's cool to see. So I think New York, Miami, LA is doing a good job out there. I know they're bringing some people out there. Dallas too, as it's starting to come up with some nice within this realm. And those are kind of my like to watch cities, I guess, for this. But it's cool seeing like the Midwest and like places you'd never think wanted to do stuff like this. So it's cool.
Yeah, I think it's like it's always like surprising when you go somewhere, and I think it's like usually like those like cities that you wouldn't expect. It's actually because like there are artists that are living there, like from there, that like
Mm,
that are championing the sound a bit, and like either promoters taking like risks on people that like may not sell that many tickets, but it's like for the culture, kind of like. I know
yeah,
like in Denver, like Brennan Kelly,
yeah, he's
option
great.
4, like he's
Mm,
like for years and years have always been bringing like European artists and like more minimal artists there. And I don't go to those shows. I don't live in Denver, but like
yeah.
even if some like kind of maybe don't do as well, as like it's not like a super safe bet compared to a more commercial sound. It's like just
Mm,
getting that in there, building the fans. Maybe that converts some people into like wanting to learn how to produce it and DJ it. Now
yeah.
they tell their friends, and it kind of trickles down. I think Miami is like super interesting because it's like Miami is really like the cultural link to like South America for the United States, and like this sound is like really big in South America. Like,
Yeah.
BB will do fucking a lot of tickets in like Argentina and Colombia,
Mm,
and like, so I think it's interesting because it's like that connection will make it a lot more popular. And like even like, yeah, like in New York, it's big obviously because it's like you get the same thing with Europe, but I think because like South America, it's so strong there that
yeah,
that's
it
why
is.
Miami's a little better than New York for it.
Yeah, South America is super strong. It's crazy. I mean, I did a little tour in Peru about a year ago, and the fact that I really like I was really just getting started then, and they were able to book me as headliners down there and bring like a couple hundred people, which is crazy to
Yeah.
me because like I can't even do that I couldn't even at that time couldn't even do that in some places in America, and I go down to South America and like way more people know me there than they did here at the time anyway. So that was really cool to see. But yeah, South America is super strong for this sound. And Another big city for this is Atlanta. Surprisingly, they have like a huge
Really?
Romanian minimal. Yeah, they have a huge minimal scene down there. There's a couple of guys who just love it down there, and they've been booking those types of parties for a minute now. So they have a great scene for that. If anyone's interested in checking it
That's
out.
that's so interesting. I would have never
Yeah.
expected that. Even like house music in Atlanta is like it's a big city, so it's like when I've played there, it's like it's good, but like it's like even like a city, for example, like Dallas that you mentioned, like I get more of that like I don't know, it's just like that raw house kind of feeling in somewhere like Dallas than Atlanta, just because I think like bass music is kind of king in Atlanta and even
Yeah,
in the
or
South,
trap.
like
Yeah.
trap and hip hop. Um, but yeah, it's super interesting. I think it's also what I notice a lot with like minimal house is like it's kind of like an after hours sound, and especially in like these other countries where it's more popular, clubbing and partying, it goes way later into the night. We talked about like Romania, like our Sunwaves Festival. If you guys don't
24
know,
hour sets. Yeah.
yeah, that people have done like 36-hour sets at this festival. Like some like world records have been Marco Corolla back to backs and like all this crazy shit. But yeah, watch some of the videos on YouTube. But I think it's interesting because it's like a lot of times because maybe you can't fill a 800 cap nightclub with like some of these artists and like maybe the promoters budgets aren't always there. It becomes a lot of like, all right, after hour spots. Like I know in LA you have like Blind Tiger kind of, which is
Hmm.
it's a legit venue, but it's like an after hours spot. And like that kind of like becomes like the home for a lot of these like parties and scenes, which
Yeah,
is
I also think this type of like the more Romanian metal stuff, especially, it's very easy on the ear. So I think after like a night out of just like, raging your face off, it's nice to go somewhere and like a lot of these after hour spots have couches and stuff. It's very loungy. It's just like, yeah, it's very
what's the
easy
one
on
in
the ears.
Brooklyn? What's the one that's like there's a million, but like yeah, the one with like all the
Resolute does a nice job. Aftermath does a nice job. Aftermath had a basketball
Aftermath,
fault.
that's the
Yeah.
one. I went to one like after the pandemic, and it's like it's just so funny because the vibe is like it's kind of like someone's like living room, but like it's
Yeah, it's
not.
cozy. It's cozy.
It's
Yeah.
cozy, it's dark, everyone's so it's like if you're still on it and you're like trying to rage, like it's probably not the move, but if you're trying
Yeah.
to just keep the groove going, like that's kind of some of these
Yeah,
after parties are the way to be.
definitely.
Cool. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about like kind of diving into production.
Hmm.
What kind of separates these genres a little bit, especially like the more American tech house sound, or even like even something like Hot Creations, for example, or
Hmm.
like Repopulate Mars. Like what separates that from like I guess each of maybe let's focus not on Romanian, but like the deep tech and then like
Yeah,
the
sure.
minimal tech stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like just dialing and stripping in your grooves a little bit. I think not using as open of hats and not using as long of claps. Using all these like weird modular, like glitchy, very like warm analog texture sounding and stuff like that. I find also that a lot of these like more like hot creation stuff, they're sampling things in very interesting ways. They're doing like all this vocal stretching or what was I trying to say? I kind of blanked there. I think yeah, just your as samples. It comes down a lot of your sample selection. Honestly, I think more punchy kicks, and it's more dialed in grooves in that sense. I think that's really is like the drum groove is really what separates the two.
Are there any things that you think that like it's funny because I feel like yeah, you're right. Like sound selection is like so important. It's almost like if you hear like a certain sound, for example, like let's say you just like heard like a very like detuned like saw wave or something like that, which is like
Hmm.
to be honest, like the most like one of the most simple of sounds in electronic music because it's just like it's one of the four basic shapes on an oscillator. It's not much anything else going on, but like you don't like hear that as much in either of those genres, mostly because I guess it is more focused on like kind of like warmth and like less like crazy rich harmonics that are gonna really fill
Yeah,
out the field.
it's just less is more almost. I would say. I think we try to get away with like using as little elements as because I mean the term minimal is just like as little as you can get. Kind of look at like minimal art, right? There's not much to it, but it's something's there. It's cool. It's different. And I just like I always say, like look at minimal art, or like a minimal home, and just apply that to music. And it's kind of just like using less. Less is always usually more.
See, I think that's interesting. I would agree with you to a degree in the sense that maybe like the tracks feel like there's less, but like for example, if you listen to like some like Chris Dusty tracks and stuff,
Oh
there's like a
yeah,
lot of fucking shit going on in there where I'm like, this is actually like really complicated to like make
it
something like
is.
this.
Yes, it's simple but complex. That's a really good point. I didn't want to breeze over that. It's just, I mean, some of these tracks that I've worked on that are sound really simple. I have this one track called Afterbeat on Need Music, which is Robin Fest's label. It's like 120 layers or something like that, but like you'd never guess. It's a lot of when you have these like more minimal tracks, like layering is really important, and making sure you pick the exact correct samples and like shaping them properly is super important too. But yeah, some of these tracks are very complex within minimal, so I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
I
breeze
think
over that.
especially like musically as well. Like once you kind of get into like the minimal deep tech, is that its own genre on Beatport or no?
Minimal deep tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
That's different than minimal house on Beatport or no?
Oh no, sorry, no. It's
It's
just minimal
one.
deep tech. Yeah, it's all just one. I almost wish they would separate the two, but it's I mean, how many more genres can they add on Beatport?
There's a lot on there.
I'm on it right now, and there's like one, two, three. It looks like there's like 30, 40 genres on here right now. Like it's like how much more can you separate it?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. So what I was gonna say was like for minimal deep tech, like that kind of sound where you get like some really interesting like jazzy chord progressions as well.
It's very funky. It's very funky music. That's
Yeah,
what I'll
it's
say
like
too.
funky. I would say it's like very a lot of it. If you're looking to get into this style, and like looking into getting into like the chord progressions, it's very like unresolved feeling sometimes. So
Yeah.
it's not kind of like the Beatles, like where it's like at the last chord kind of brings you back to the root note and like everything feels like good. It's like very like two kind of chords like stabs working and it kind of leaves you like hanging a bit. So I
Yeah.
would like look for like that kind of like feeling in your chord progressions. I get
I think jazz is a great reference point for minimal as well. A lot of this music is especially in like the deeper minimal stuff, it's very jazzy. So if you kind of want to get into that more Stassi Toman type sound, like just study some jazz music because I know those guys all definitely do that. And kind of just like yeah, don't be. I think that minimal is a lot of like rule bending, which I think is really cool. Like I also like kind of don't really know what I'm gonna get sometimes, and I think honestly, the more minimal you go, the more you get of that too.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think also, so like going back to some practical tips for you guys, like if you're looking to kind of like shorten things up and you're using Ableton, there's a nice like, any kind of like plugin or way in your DAW where you can like shorten the transients of your loops kind of all at once. That can be super helpful. You can also do it
There's
manually, fading
sorry,
stuff.
I just
Yeah,
want to
what were you gonna
forget.
say?
There's one from Plugin Alliance called SPL Transient Shaper. That one's
Mhm.
really good. I put that on almost everything now. So I put that on the individual channels and then on the whole drum group as well. So yeah, I think dialing in your transients is super important in this style too. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you.
No, you're good. That's what this section I'm trying to get as many like little tips for people as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
sequencing is also really big in this music, like using things like Sting or like just any other like Riffer is great too, where it kind of spits out these random patterns you kind of really never be able to make on your own. I mean, you can figure it out. It's going to take you much longer that way, but just spitting out random patterns, I think, is really helpful in this style of music too.
Yeah, I think like you can sequence so much in this. Like you can sequence bass lines, you can sequence percussion, vocal chops. Like that's the beauty of having like a step sequencer, like a 16 what is it, 16 steps or whatever like that. You
Mm.
can, really long. But yeah, I think getting one of those if your DAW doesn't have one built in. Sting, for example, in Ableton's like a really good randomized sequencer. There's one from the guys that make who makes Serum? X for Records. There's one that's like kind of pricey. I know Sid uses it. But that can be really.
Riffer is really good too. That's like $50. I know like Hector Kudo and a bunch of other guys use that one too.
Is that can you just like load in drum samples or like hi-hats and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
things? Yeah.
same thing. It's
Especially
like $50. It's good.
yeah, I think especially for like hat patterns, you want to like kind of like put in as much depth as you can with the elements that you already have. So for example, let's say in like a normal, I'm not gonna say normal, in like an Americanized tech house sound, maybe for your open hi-hat or your closed hat loop, it's kind of staying like the same length throughout. Like one thing that you'll probably see a little bit more here is like, you know, automating like the decay time on a hat sound like that, so
Yeah,
that in
velocity as
velocity,
well. Yeah,
pitch.
yeah, that's a great point. One other cool thing I started doing recently too was just like taking your entire drum groove and just throwing like a multi effects rack on it. Something like Tantra. Tantra's a very big plugin for minimal. Or something like Guitar Rig, and
What
you
is
just throw,
Tantra?
Tantra, it's a multi-effects plugin, so it's like it's so much to it. It's really complex. I don't even know really how to use it. I kind of just turn the knobs to whatever sounds cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like throwing that on like a top loop within your drums or on the entire drum group and just like processing them in ways that really don't make sense but work for the music.
Yeah, I think like resampling is like really important because when you resample, like you kind of like keep the elements you already have, but like let's say you have like a top loop and then you were to run it through something like Tantra or one thing I saw Latman do in like Ableton is like you can run it through the grain delay and like
Grain
use like
delay, yeah.
LFOs to like change the grain delay plugins while you're recording it. So let's say you have like a
Mhm.
top loop and then you run it through this and you get some really like wonky version of it, but it's still kind of like the input data is the same as the top loop that you're using in your track.
Mhm.
Then that new percussion loop that you have from it, it's like the groove, like in theory, the groove from that and like the source frequencies that like created it are from your track already. So it's gonna gel nicely rather than like going to your minimal house like sample pack and then grabbing another glitch percussion. Like that may work, it may sound amazing, but like I
Yeah.
think more times than not, if you can get it from the source, it can really
Yep.
help.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I do that all the time. It's kind of like when you like with your vocals and you turn your vocals into like a riser. It's like the same thing. Like you don't need to
Yeah,
there's no need to grab additional things when you already have your core foundation. Like you said, more times than not, it's gonna not work than work, I think, if you're just kind of adding things in just to add them.
I wanted to let's pick your brain a little bit about like tension because I think that's something that is a key difference between the more minimal genres and like
Hmm.
tech house is like the way they go into tension. So I think in tech house it can be a little bit more in your face, like big snare roll, big risers, automation, and especially
Hmm.
this is like something I'm thinking about a lot now is like the way that like tension gets introduced like arrangement wise. Like
Yeah.
usually in tech house, it's very obvious to the listener that now we are building the energy and like this is the section that is like the build up. I think in
Yeah.
minimal house it can get a lot more interesting where like maybe you don't even realize your attention until the last second or just
Hmm.
like how do you approach that in your tracks and in
Yeah.
A&Ring and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite parts of minimal is like the build-ups are always different, but I think like silence is such a huge tool within minimal and like instead of so like in traditional American tech house, you're adding elements, you're adding snare rolls, you're adding more risers, whatever. But in minimal, it's like you're kind of taking things away and maybe you're just using silence as a tool because that can be a really, really great tool. And I think that speaks a lot to like the minimal sound. I think that's a great point you just made. Yeah, I take a lot of things out of my buildups versus putting them in. So I think that's super important in minimal.
What about like
Yeah.
automation? Do you focus on that a lot?
Yeah, I like filtering out your drums or like I use Filter Freak a lot on a lot of my stuff. I think that really helps with like your arrangement and keeping things interesting within the this style of music too.
Is that
That's
Sound Toys or
so
no?
that's yeah, Sound Toy. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sound Toys plugin is great. Um, But yeah, if using Filter Freak on a lot of my stuff and just like filtering out the lows on stuff or just like yeah, I usually on a lot of my tracks you notice I'll cut the last like 4 bars or the last 2 bars right before the drop instead of having it all just go boom right into the drop. And then usually most of the time a lot of the entire groove is missing on the initial drop of minimal and then it's reintroduced rather than having the whole groove smash at once. So a lot of delays in the drop as well. So it'll be like just kick and bass or just kick bass and vocals. I think that's a huge proponent of this music as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like saving things for certain parts of the track so that you know, especially when you don't have much going on, like stripping it down even further before. So
Hmm.
it kind of hits. Yeah, I think like, yeah, especially like the arrangement as well, like not necessarily always having it like 16 bars and this is like it's obvious, like kind of like you don't even realize you're in the build up almost, or like you don't like the automation is so subtle that like by the time you get there, you're like, oh, now it's kind of coming in. So I feel like people take that, that's more of like a just like a risk taking thing that people are willing to
Hmm.
do because like they're not like this has to fit a mold or this has to work in like a big festival with like, you know, and maybe it does work in a big festival, but like in a certain type of environment that can like dictate arrangement and make it more cookie cutter in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
um Cool, man. Yeah, so like I wanted to kind of like cap off this conversation talking about, you know, it is the start of a new year and we talked a little bit about like cities that we think that sound's going to be you know, kind of big in and you know, maybe we could talk a little bit more about like events and festivals and stuff like that, especially like in America that like, you know, book some of these artists. But yeah, I just wanted to like see, you know, what do you kind of see getting really popular this year within like those like minimal categories? Like who are the artists to watch, the collectives, the labels?
Yeah. So I guess for like that more deep stuff,
Uh-huh.
I mean, Piv is finally getting booked over here, which is awesome. I've been on Piv for a while, so I think Piv is going
So
to continue to
what
grow
is
over here.
Piv?
Yeah. So Piv, for anyone who doesn't know, that's owned by Prunk, and that's like um guys, like I mean, Stussy does his own thing now, like up the Stuss, but it's like that style of music. It's like Stussy, Joko. It's more of that deep stuff that's owned by Prunk. So I think Piv is going to keep growing over here this year. On the more minimal tech stuff, I mean, Revival's doing a great job. Short Circuit, which is Jeff Sorkowitz, is doing a great job. It's cool to see that there's more like American, like my label's sort of in that realm too. Like it's cool to see more labels that are pushing that, like release wise, not just events wise within in the States. I think that's cool. So I think New York and Miami are going to be doing really well with those sounds. Los Angeles too. There's a promoter over there called Front Left. They're sort of booking this same sort of style for minimal tech
San
too.
Diego, right?
That
Or
well,
no?
no, well they were in San Diego. Now they moved to LA, but they're still doing stuff
Okay.
in both. Yeah,
That's
but
Matt Egberts, right?
Matt Egbert and Griffin Lee. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they do a really nice job. So I think those are. I think the minimal tech stuff is gonna override the minimal deep stuff for a while. Um, And then like other artists to watch, like I really like these R Squared kids. They're great. They've like released on Knee Deep and Revival this year.
I
I
think
like
I've heard
Sky.
of them. They've been on like Solo's label before too, kind of
Yeah,
like
they
making
have
tech
this.
house back in the day.
Yeah, they have this cool like retro like 80s sort of big synth vibe that like sorry, big snare vibe that like Ben Sterling and like Joseph Edmund have.
Yeah.
Um, and then down in like or I know like Orlando has a good scene for this too. Um, there's this kid Slug down there who's awesome. Chase West is doing great too within this sound. He's really hot right now. People are really like receiving his music very well. So yeah, that's kind of my like to watch for the
That's a
year, I
lot. That's
guess.
a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of familiar names there. Some unfamiliar that I'm definitely gonna check out. But I think, yeah, if you're into this sound, like a big thing is also it is such a it's a big community in the U.S., but it's also very small. Like everyone
We
kind
all
of
know
knows
each
each
other. Yeah, just start
everyone knows
talking.
each other, and it's like, you know, if this is like what you're into, it's like trying to go to like some of these parties, whether that's like, you know, if you're able to going down to Miami Music Week, that's probably the best week to like, you
Oh
know, meet all
yeah,
these people and
yeah.
party with them.
Yeah, that was
um
big for me last year. Because I always knew these people from online and stuff, but getting to meet them in person is a whole another thing. That's when you really make it. Like, I encourage everyone within this sound. It's much easier to message someone on Instagram and get an answer. As like the music's not as big as some of these other. Like, it's much easier to access these artists than it is for like the traditional American tech house right now. I think so. Yeah, it's a very, very friendly, collaborative community as well. So definitely go ahead and just shoot some messages out and try to connect, and then see if you can meet up with them. Everyone's gonna be at Music Week, so I think that was a great thing for me to go to last year. I really got to meet everyone I felt like I needed to meet that week. So that's a good point.
Yeah, that's really how you like build the, you know, any genre. It doesn't have to even be this like that. You know, I've been
Yeah.
going to Miami for like years now, and it's like that's really where you know, can befriend artists, especially if like you're a smaller artist and like, you know, you're just getting into it. That's where, you know, you can like befriend artists and really you know, get them to hear your music and just like make connections with like industry people. Kind of separate conversation, but I think it is like, yeah, in every corner of the country right now, there's like something going on. Like I'm sure in Seattle, there's like people that are doing parties there. There's parties in Chicago. There's parties in Detroit. Like it's really, this sound is now, I feel like a basis. If I don't know how big it is, but almost like a basis in like every single city. So I think it's going to get really big this year. And it is nice to see a lot of like American, even when I say American artists, like they live in America, like kind of like championing the sound. Like Ranger Truco is like another good example.
Yeah,
Kind of pivoted
he
into
just
this.
totally kind of rebranded his sound altogether. It's awesome. He's doing a great job with it. I really like him. He's definitely someone if you guys should check out too.
Yeah, and like I think that a lot of people are kind of that we're more tech house are going to start like focusing a little bit more on this, or even if it's not like rebranding or like a full pivot, so to speak, it's more of like even someone like Chris Lake, like the stuff they're signing, like I even like the tech house is kind of going a little bit more like this. Like you have like artists like Joshua, for example, is not, I never say he's like a minimal house artist, but like his style of tech house is much more stripped than
I think he's going that way though, by the sounds of what he's been releasing lately. I mean, if you just like listen to just his like just the instrumentals by themselves, they're pretty stripped. They're great. That's a good point. But yeah, I think there's a lot more artists who were traditionally doing this American like style are now moving into the sound and giving it a shot, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And like you're seeing this type of music get played by like I saw a video of Martin Garrix the other day. He was playing a minimal tech track. It was like so I'll try to find the video and send it. But yeah, it's just like
that's crazy.
It's really cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like it's very exciting for a lot of artists, and so artists always like to kind of like be exciting and get onto the hot new thing. So I definitely think it's going to be extremely big this year. I think the party's going to get bigger. You're going to see more artists from Europe come in, more artists from South America come in, more American artists kind of get the sound. And that's why we're so excited to Kick and Bass to kind of have Kai spearheading this. So we're going to be having 2 videos a month focused on this genre. We're going to, if you want genre specific feedback, you can request Kai for your feedbacks for this. We're going to probably have some more guest coaches that focus in on this to do some track breakdowns for you guys, and who knows, maybe sample packs in the future. Lots of fun stuff. So yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting within the community to get you guys more involved with this, and just check it out.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for having me, dude. That was fun.
Yeah, thank you, man. And goodbye, everyone. We love you. This was episode 8 of the Kick and Bass podcast. We'll see you soon for episode 9.